Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are in this world today. My name is Aaron Lee. I am actually the Alliance Marketing Manager here at SUSE. We are very, very excited to be participating in another year of HPE TSS. We've been participating for many years now. I'm joined today by Brian Fromm and Brian Gartner, who are, hold on. Already, look at this. We are already experiencing technical difficulties. There you go. There's our beautiful faces that you see live and in photographic form right there. There's our contact information. Brian Fromm, who's our solution architect, and Brian Gartner, who's our senior technology strategist. They are the smart ones. I am just the person who have been chosen to speak for some odd reason. And we're excited to talk to you today about our solutions and how we partner with HPE and solve your customers' issues. Well, as mentioned, it's a pretty jammed-packed session today. And you'll notice in the title, it's called Choose Your Own Adventure. I read these novels when I was a kid. They're called Choose Your Own Adventure, and it's a book laid out where you get to a certain part in the story and you have to choose what the characters do in the next step of the story, and then you skip ahead in the book and it tells a different story and however you choose, right? So that's what we wanted to go with. You are going to help us with this discussion. So we actually have 4 topics, maybe 5, we'll see what we get to talk about through this. And as mentioned prior, anytime throughout this session, please feel free to either raise your hand or invite you to use the Q&A. I'm pointing off screen for some odd reason. It's because my Q&A screen is on my other screen. So click on the bottom. If you hover down at the bottom, a menu will pop up. Click on the Q&A and enter in your question. And we'll be sure to get to it. If we don't have time to it, we invite you to visit our booth where we have our colleagues manning this virtual booth. And they're more than happy to talk to you or set an appointment to have a meeting with you. Okay, so we have 75 minutes together, all together in this room, virtual room. So I hope everybody took their showers and put on deodorant because we will be sure to make this very exciting, right? So the first thing that we want to talk about is actually our very first poll question. So let's get to that. Hold on one second. And that poll is, how do I launch the poll from, if I'm sharing my screen? Do I need to stop sharing my screen?
No, you can still launch the poll. Just click on the poll button below.
Okay, I'm scrolling down to the bottom of my screen. Okay, hold on.
If you want, I can launch it. If you want.
Yeah, could you do that? Because I'm hovering down below and it's not coming up. So the poll question number 1. There you go. Okay. So how familiar are you with us, the company SUSE? That's the question. Do you have no knowledge?
1 sec.
Oh, wow. Familiar with SUSE? I'm an expert.
Still on it.
Oh, I have Siri talking to me for some odd reason. I apologize for that. Okay.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
That's Siri, everybody. And I just probably announced her name again, so. Okay, we'll give it a
end
couple.
the poll? Oh no, we've still got more people coming in.
Yeah, we still have people coming in.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll, see what the results
are. All right, very good. So it sounds like the familiarity with us is very little, tied with very little, or familiar with us. So that's good to know, Brian and Brian. We have a room full of people who have some, but some very little knowledge of us as a company. All right, very good. So I'm going to
people who know quite a bit, actually. So that's great to hear. To look forward to hearing your comments as we go.
Exactly. All right. So we're probably going to need help with the future polls. Just a FYI. Okay, here we go. So as far as SUSE, the first thing you need to know about us is that we are, let me go back actually, is that we're a global leader in innovative and reliable enterprise-grade open source solutions. Our solutions are powering thousands of customers' workloads, mission critical workloads, including electronic banking, enterprise applications, autonomous vehicles, satellite operation systems, life-saving medical device companies, many, many more. We will talk a little bit more about, our history, because I know some of you who might know us might think of us primarily as a Linux related company, but we've grown to be much more than that. Along with the stats that you see on this chart, I just want to, highlight a couple of things. We have thousands of customers, and we're proud to have, 13 out of the 15 largest financial service firms as a customer, 14 out of 15 aerospace firms, 10 out of 10 largest automotive companies, automotive firms, 13 out of 15 pharma firms, and 5 out of the 5 largest technology firms we count as our customers. As I've mentioned and alluded to in the past, things have changed a lot in the last couple of years, given the pandemic and such, and market dynamics has changed. Us as a company also, you'll see that last year we actually listed publicly. So we're now a publicly traded company on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange in May of last year. So we've almost hit our 1-year anniversary of that milestone. And with the acquisition of Rancher, SUSE Rancher, something that we'll talk about later, we've become the world's largest independent open source company, with Rancher being the leading Kubernetes management platform. We have a lot of growing in our company, strong growth momentum, and we're excited to go to market with partners such as HPE. Now, we believe that every company is going through some sort of digital transformation, right? And the power behind that digital transformation is really innovation. Everything is connected, from innovation out in Mars and satellites down to the near and far edge here. Everything is connected and innovation is everywhere. And at the heart of our strategy is our leadership. In our leadership are what we consider the 2 most important technologies powering digital transformation, and that's Linux and Kubernetes. Now, when it comes to running your workloads, a one-size-fits-all Linux operating system does not fit all. That's why we offer the industry's most adaptable Linux OS. No matter what your workload requirements, we have an OS solution purpose-built for your needs. And if you're running an OS from other vendors, no problem. We have a product called SUSE Manager that provides a single platform for managing all of your operating systems on-premise or in the cloud. And then the same holds true for Kubernetes. SUSE offers the industry's only container management platform that provides full management of all Kubernetes distributions, whether managing 1 cluster or millions. SUSE Rancher provides a consistent, simple management experience, no matter what the distribution of Kubernetes you're using for us or another vendor, and no matter where they're running it, on premises or in the cloud. So you'll see in this next slide, this is sort of our stack, our solution stack. From the bottom, our operating system solutions, Rancher. We have a couple of products that are coming up in this fiscal year. And then you see at the very top sort of our future investments and how it sort of rounds out our portfolio. And then as we go through this discussion, you'll sort of see how these products will help you and your customers in their digital transformation journey. So with that, we're actually going to jump in to the next poll question. So if we could get help loading up the second poll question on this first step in our Choose Your Own Adventure. So you will help us choose the next topic. So let's see here. So if Elk or somebody else on the call can pull up and launch poll question number 2. There it is. Perfect. So of the 4 topic areas, what are you focusing on most with your computers? Edge, digital transformation, cloud native, enterprise computing, or something else? Answers are flooding in. Let's see here. Looks like we're gonna go with enterprise computing. Does that sound good to everybody? So Brian with a Y we're gonna have him take the reins. And Brian, if you want to provide a quick introduction of yourself too before you jump in, that would be great. I failed to do that. I apologize for that, other than giving him your title. So we're gonna hand the time over to Brian Gardner.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, and my name is Brian Gardner. I work on the alliances team at SUSE, and I work with a lot of hardware partners, embedded partners, software partners, and my key focus is with HPE too. So I do that. I've been with SUSE for almost a decade, and before that, I was with HP Pre-E. So for multiple decades, just giving you an idea how old that gray beard looks, and done a lot of technology over the years and everything, and gone from electrical engineering all the way to software engineering. So I get to play with all kinds of cool stuff. And with that, Aaron, let's go ahead and move on. So even in this subtopic area about edge computing and data, I'm going to give a brief introduction about some more details about what Aaron was talking about within the SUSE Linux enterprise space, and also SUSE Manager just a little bit. And then I'm going to allow you to pick between, so I'm planting a seed, just be able to in the chat or wherever, pick between talking about high performance computing, which is a level above just the OS, and also, or in the SUSE solutions for SAP space. So Aaron, let's move on, and then we'll do the fork later on. And you can go on to the next slide too. Just like Aaron mentioned, the adaptable Linux operating system. So really what we do is that adaptable Linux, and you can call it adaptable Linux, you can call it general purpose, you can run it anywhere. It could be on a very small edge device, or it could be on a supercomputer, or it could be on a massive mission critical support platform, okay? And one of the key aspects is all about that certification, that compliance, that security. And one of the big things that we do with HPE as well, and one of our big environments and verticals is in the SAP services thing. And like, I hope that Brian gets to talk on one of the other topics too, about the issue of as we do more and more applications, as customers do that, we want to reduce that DevOps perspective and make it easy so they can deploy whatever they need, wherever they need it. Okay, so reduce that friction. Next, Aaron. So if you kind of drill down into that layer in the Linux layer, you'll see that there's even more kinds of information there. There's more kinds of technologies there. We run across, like I said, you can run it anywhere, whether it's your desktop, an edge, a data center, in the cloud, in a branch office, whatever. At the architecture level, multiple architectures we support and many platforms that are certified. And then in the operating system layer, we have things like you can run real time. You can do the high performance computing, SAP, like I talked about. We have a very small, very immutable, very read mostly OS called Sleep Micro. But you can also manage systems. You can do extensions above it and be able to do HA, high availability. You can do live patching. You can run on your workstation. And again, anything you want anywhere. Next, Aaron. And when you look inside of what we provide, even in that from that last cake layer slide, you'll notice that there's lots of modules that if you want to do something a certain way, you can pull in a module and do that, just like those extensions for high availability. Or if you still have applications that run on just Python 2, okay, there is a module there to pull in that base thing to finish your applications until you finish porting and moving over to like Python 3. Next, Aaron. And like I said, everywhere, you know, you can run in the public cloud, and there are on-demand instances that pay as you go kinds of things, or you can bring your own subscriptions that you either had or you want to pull in or you just acquired and bring them into the main CSPs like that are listed here. And you can see all of a lot of those things that were in the portfolio and layers, they're already there. Next, Aaron. And just to give you an idea too, I want to talk real quickly about the package hub, which is a module. So if you look in the open SUSE space, which is the community space, there's, you know, about 5 to 6 times as many packages available there. Well, in the package hub, what we do is we port a lot of those to make sure that they work on SUSE Linux Enterprise. And those are available there, but they're just community maintained, community supported. But that could be a way that you get to an issue, you get something working and you move forward. And then you can actually also request a feature request to us to say, yeah, we'd really like that in the SUSE Linux Enterprise too. So it's kind of like a transitionary step. Thank you. Okay, Aaron, next. And this is one thing that I really want to talk about that spreads across all of the portfolio layers, whether you're talking about just the enterprise layer, the SUSE Linux enterprise layer, or the Rancher layer. We focus heavily on security aspects, okay? And some people have those checkboxes that they need when they want to acquire or use something. Could be like FIPS, okay? They want to make sure that that's there. And there'll be another slide here in a minute that explains even more of them. But they want to have that ability and they want to make sure that that's there. We do those certifications on a regular basis. Those are there, those are available, you can use those. And there may be modules that have those specific requirements that you need. But we also have things like live kernel patching. So if you're running a mission critical system, and it could be like SAP HANA or your Oracle database or whatever, you can patch the system without having to reboot it and maintain the security updates. So, and then there's also things like firewalls like within SAP HANA and whatnot. Aaron, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll just cover another couple things. That first column there that in the top that says common criteria and with EAL 4+, that is a very high level certification that we do. They work with us to certify something very specifically, but not only that, they check and make sure that all of our build process and the supply chain that comes from the community and everything is all intact, maintained, and done correctly. So that if you have a common criteria with EAL4, that means that for that certification period, there's about a 5-year period, and you can just apply the updates that we provide that are in your supply chain to get the software, and you can still be certified, which is something that didn't used to exist. It used to be, yeah, you wanted that certification, but you had to stay with those packages. Well, now you can move on beyond that, and that's very enabling. And we also have added things like STIG. So if you want to have a checklist of all the security things you need to do, that's there. If you want to do a reporting or automation to correct the security things, the SCAP things are there too. So this is very important and covers all the spaces. Okay, Aaron, next. And with that, let me go on to SUSE Manager real quick, drill into that. Go ahead. So one thing that you really want to think about too, once you get beyond having a single system or a 10 systems or multiple systems, you may want to manage that. And Aaron brought up the really good point of, it's not just our OS that you can manage, it's other OS distributions as well, like are listed there. And while SUSE Manager uses Salt, if you're more of an Ansible fan, you can actually use that within SUSE Manager as well. So you can basically say, I want to run an Ansible playbook to do something. You can do that with SUSE Manager too. But it also does those reportings at the security level. So I can say, do you need patches on the system? Are there CVE issues? You can even run the OpenSCAP thing. And within SUSE Manager, you can actually build images to deploy. And that could be a full-blown image for a bare metal or a VM. And you can actually even build container images too. So if you're already starting down the path of digital transformation towards cloud native, you can build those container images. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's your choice. Are we going to talk about high performance computing or SAP? If you want to throw it in the chat, which would you rather hear about? Because I've already used about 10 minutes. I've got 10 minutes more to go, over whichever one you'd like. So far, we got a couple or 3.
That's the SAP fans. Lots of SAP fans here, Brian.
That's totally fine. Yep, that seems to be the dominant answers that I'm seeing. So let's go ahead and hop there, Aaron.
Okay. Is it the very next slide?
No, it's the next section within there. Go to the next cover slide, the breakpoint slide.
Go. Let's see here.
You're almost there. 155, I think it is.
So there we go.
Okay, so let's go ahead and drill into that.
Just loading it up. There you go.
Okay, and what we are seeing, and let me kind of talk again about the partnership with HPE. You know, if you look at the amount of customers that are running SAP S/4HANA already, because it's required to run Linux, that's like 80+% of all the customers are running on SUSE Linux Enterprise for SAP. But if you look within the HPE context, about 40% of those are running on HPE platforms too. And that's all the way up from a Superdome Flex down to even ProLiants, okay? And what we're also seeing too is in the MSP space, and I'll mention this as well with HPE GreenLake, they offer SAP as a service too, okay? But what SAP has said is by 2027, they need you to move to this space if you're not already there. So even though we have that large platform and that large population of it already there, if you need to move, there are options to get you there, and there are things, and I'll talk about it in a minute, about how it eases how you get there. But managed service providers, they can already do this, and you can use this if you're a customer. So we also, because of with our SAP relationship, all of their development is done on SUSE Linux Enterprise. Okay, they do all that, and that's where they do it, and that's why that's the answer, and that's why that's the easy thing. If you're a solution architect and you know you need to run something like S/4HANA, that's the easy answer, okay? Because all of that stuff is already done, certified, performance checked, all that functionality is there. And there's the notion of you can have basically one support hand to reach to, and all of the background people that do all that supply chain, whether it's the hardware, the OS, or the SAP applications, they can give you those answers, okay? Next, Aaron.
Oh.
Yep, and then these are a lot of the hardware platforms that are certified there. And of course, you see Hewlett Packard Enterprise there. And they do a great job, again, across all those different platforms. And they keep adding platforms to that list. Next slide. And then if you look from a customer perspective, you'll see that it's everywhere too, across many, many, many verticals, okay? And hopefully you're either involved with one of those customers or you'd like to be, because we'll talk about things that you might want to do value adds or things even beyond their base SAP installations too, because we have new product offerings coming in that way. All right, Aaron. So if you want to look up success stories in a couple of the verticals, there's some of those too, okay? Whether you're talking about finance or IT or healthcare or automotive and manufacturing, there's lots of them out there. So this is a short list, but they are out there and visible. And you can always ping Aaron to get some more of those too.
You can.
Okay, next. And well, then we'll go ahead and skip on to the next slide too, because SAP can actually span even our portfolio too, and I'm going to talk about that too. But it really is that best Linux that I talked about, because again, with SAP, they do all their development our thing, and we make sure that it has all of the features they need, all the functionality they need, all the patches, all the things like high availability. And I know HPE offers another high availability option. We support that too, right? And HPE supports that. But there's all these tooling things to kind of help automate how you do the implementation, how you do the deployment, and how you monitor that. And that, because again, this may be a very mission critical application that you have in your environment. So we want to make sure that you can set it up easily, on day 0, day 1, and you can maintain it for a long time, and then you can upgrade it over time too. And we know how long some of those time periods are to do the upgrades, but it is possible to do, because again, that certification happens, the updates are available, the migration is available, the ability to do a scale up or scale out kind of cluster, so that you can make sure the data is there and all that. Okay, next. And this is just kind of showing all of those pieces that I kind of mentioned. And I'm going to talk about some of these like Trento and automation for the deployment and whatnot. But a lot of the things are these wizards that we provide to make it very easy to deploy and easy to set up and easy to maintain. So let's go on to the next one. Yeah, you can go ahead and hop on there. So, you know, there was that long learning curve for some people to figure out how to move towards this and whatnot. But again, we've talked about the security, we've talked about the automation a little bit, but high availability, again, so you can scale up, so you can have a primary and a fallback one, or you can have a cluster where you have all of these things doing this stuff for you and answering those requests, giving you those answers. Go ahead. So some people, because they might have a smaller, so they might do a VM or things like that, but you need to provision all of those things like that. And then you deploy the operating system, and then you do things, and you can do management with even things like SUSE Manager, or do it directly yourself. But what you're going to start to see, and this is that infrastructure down the thing, we have a automation module that uses things like Terraform. So that's infrastructure as code. Basically, you can edit a couple configuration variables, push a button, and the entire infrastructure gets set up. And that can be in a public cloud. And if you're doing it on premise yourself, you may want to skip that step or use some of the other technology we have, like SUSE Manager and whatnot. But you have that ability to choose and do that thing. Okay, but what it does then is it also has another layer on top that's based on Salt to complete on top of the OS to deploy the SAP installation to say, okay, you wanted to scale out cluster with 5 nodes, cool, no problem, make that so. And then also make sure that the monitoring's turned on so you know out of those 5 systems, which one's running and which one's resource limited or whatever. Okay, next. And why don't you go ahead and then the next slide, because I know I'm running out of my 20 minutes time here. Trento. So this is really neat. It is basically a set of containerized version things that can run and monitor your SAP, but it can validate and say, these were the config values I have. These are what's still here. So you can deal with problems like this between keyboard and chair. If somebody, a sysadmin, mucked with the config file, this Trento will tell you, that got changed. We need to deal with that. But it also does all the monitoring of that landscape of that multi-node cluster or whatever. And it does some artificial intelligence based system checks to keep looking over forward and say, yep, it was working fine. It was working fine. It's still doing this. Oh, something changed. Okay. And it can let you know. But it is a very single, easy thing to install. Again, like I said, it's a clustered containerized app that can be installed pretty much anywhere you need to, outside of the cluster that's running the SAP, or even within it. Your choice where you want to do that. But you have that ability with Trento to give you that answer, to give that perspective about that day 2 operations of how it's working. And with that, I think, Aaron, let's turn it back over to the next topic to talk about.
Yeah, so could we get the third poll question pulled up, which should be, what area will you and your customers be focusing on? There you go. Thank you, Brian. So everybody out in the audience, if you could please answer, and we'll see what we'll take this conversation on the next chapter. Oh, pretty evenly split. Pretty close there. Wow. Okay. I don't know. Oh, digital transformation looks like is the next topic of discussion. So that's Brian with an I. He will take the reins. And if Brian, as you jump in, could you just quickly introduce yourself also, since I failed to do that at the top end? That would be great.
Thanks, Aaron. My name is Brian Frome, and I am the Global Technical Alliance Manager for HPE here at SUSE. I live in Colorado. middle of the country. And yeah, that was pretty interesting poll, because it was very close, of course, and kind of almost like a bell curve in one way. Although I liked that Edge was also part of this. And I'm going to talk about digital transformation, and I'll touch on how Edge is really, in my mind, a piece of the way companies are perceiving what they need to do as part of digital transformation. So let's jump right in, and please feel free to ask questions as we're going. Again, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible, and happy to answer questions or steer the topic a little bit. So this is the agenda. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through it all in 20 minutes, but let's just leap right in. Next slide, please. Thank you. So digital transformation is a business opportunity for companies, and that's why you're talking to your customers, or your customers are talking to you about it. And there's certainly lots written about this in the marketplace. There's some great resources, books. I leaned into Harvard Business Management School has a series of books written on digital transformation, and they've been really wonderful. It's almost like coursework, but they also do case studies on this. And really, they break it down into two parts. Digital transformation is IT operations improvements or enhancements that really are leaning towards improvements in the area of speed and agility. So reforming the way IT operations provide services to the rest of the company. And then the other aspect is the one that I like to go more to, which is new services that really connect customers to companies in new digital ways. And really, when you talk to your customers, you're probably hearing both of these things. And so, one thing I'd like to hear from you, if you don't mind, is just, comment on that. If you've got customers who are saying, yeah, we're building new services, we're writing code. Or if you're hearing your customers say, yeah, we're just trying to get our systems modernized, right? Because, our systems are too slow and antiquated, and legacy systems don't live up to the kinds of services that we need to create. So I'd love to hear more about that as we go along. So please, drop notes on that. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but again, these two areas are really the key focus areas for companies in terms of what they need to achieve in terms of digital transformation. And of course, the IT operations efficiency leads to, you can't do new services the way services are deployed today. If you think about services, I'm a software developer. I started my career writing code at HPE. And of course, I was working on system code, but we'd work on a compiler for 2 years, right? We'd design for 9 months to really get the language, the implementation the way we thought we'd want it. And we'd write very detailed specifications for all that. And 9 months in the life cycle of software development today is you're out of the market. Companies are getting their new software to market in weeks to months, right? Several months to get a new service deployed. So when you talk about those speeds, you really need IT operations that can support those kinds of features. You need the rich, new modern workload technologies that you've heard, like what SAP supports, but you need those technologies to really build applications at these new market speeds. Okay, next slide, please. But digital transformation is hard, and I'm sure you're hearing that from your customers. And I like to say, I mentioned it before, speed. Speed is the new IT currency. And I kind of coined that, I just like the phrase, but it's really true. Like, it's not just that you need IT to be faster. That's not really the point. You need IT to be modernized and simplified so that everything about the services that IT creates is more flexible and fast for the company. And then that can also turn into services that get deployed and directly at customers. And then when you talk about those services that are being made for customers, there's some key aspects to those services that are required really to move at these new market speeds. And agile methodologies, for example, is really part of how a company can succeed to build high quality code in such a short period of time. Leveraging the amazing amount of data that's available. That's where the edge comes in. Certainly, as you deploy applications close to where your customer's doing business, there's just a an enormous amount of data that needs to be managed and filtered. And so new technologies apply to that: artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, the transformation of data and analysis, and all at the edge before you ever go to try to store that somewhere. Cloud native technologies, many of you mentioned cloud native and edge as part of what you're talking to your customers about. And that's certainly what we talk to customers about as well. And that's part of this mix of what customers need to be getting good at to deploy services at these new market speeds. Okay, next slide, please. Let's talk a bit about some of these aspects of cloud native technologies. And I really break this down into 3 aspects. And I'm just kind of building like a framework from the bottom up. And of course, there's IT infrastructure modernization, right? You can't deploy to old legacy types of systems that are certainly one-off and vendor lock-in approaches. You need flexible, modernized architectures that are very easy to deploy, to manage, and to modernize and update. And HPE does an amazing job in this area, and that's an area where SUSE and HPE really partner closely. And then software infrastructure modernization, and we'll go into each of these topics in more detail. So software infrastructure modernization, of course, you don't just modernize the hardware and you're done. It's really all about the software. Again, I'm a software developer, so I like to say it's all about the applications, right? That applications are what IT services are and get presented to both the company and to the customers. So you need to modernize those applications, and we talked about some of the aspects of that modernization. We'll go into a little more detail there. And then application modernization. I'm sorry, so when we're talking about software infrastructure, and I really mean the software tooling, the operating system, and the software application infrastructure layers like Kubernetes. Those are the infrastructure layers that need to be modernized so that deployment of applications are faster. And then there's the application modernization itself. That's the actual programs, the applications that companies are deploying, whether they're whether they get those applications from a third party or they write them themselves. Those applications really need to be modernized so that they excite innovation is really key to customers, and you need to excite your customers by developing innovations, and we need to do that at market speeds today. And while we still leverage the plethora of data across the enterprise and at the edge, and then there's just workload portability as part of that application modernization, and I'll go into those again in detail. So let's jump into each of those parts. Thank you. So this is just some, kind of background on digital transformation. And, we're talking about digital transformation, and I kind of leaped into some of the details, but let's back up one step and say, there's a number of areas where SUSE has done work with and had success with digital transformation. And I like to just kind of go back to, it's really about listening to customers about where they're at with what kinds of modernization they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it, right? And again, that logically really breaks down into these 2 parts. It's either about modernizing their IT infrastructure to serve the company faster and better, or it's the same thing, but it's to serve their customers faster and better, which of course goes to the first one that I mentioned. Okay, next slide, please.
There you go.
So yeah, I like to jump into a case study, and so we were talking about case studies, and we've done some work in the healthcare area, and so I'll just touch on this is an example of a company in the US that we're working with HPE, where the company's developing portable X-ray devices. And they're really looking at a number of the things that we've talked about. They're trying to figure out how do they get to market much more quickly. And that involves very low-level things like, custom new boards that require low-level programming. They've got an amazing amount of data that they need to figure out what to do with in a hospital environment, right? So security, resilience, privacy, those are all aspects of the implementation of what they're doing that's key to the success of the product. And then The software infrastructure, I mentioned a lot of this, but they need a rich IT ecosystem. And we'll talk about HPE GreenLake as part of that rich IT ecosystem. Well, that's one of the reasons this company is partnering with HPE is they really need to focus on this device as part of what they do. And they need HPE to take the IT infrastructure pieces off their plate. So that's what GreenLake does, right? GreenLake can manage the IT infrastructure for the customer. So HPE is taking on that part of the IT ecosystem. And I think that's really, an impressive success for HPE together with SUSE for this kind of technology. And then there's other aspects that we talked about. AI, machine learning, that's got to happen on the device before it ever does. There's other aspects of AI all the way back to the data center, but AI right on the device on a small, lightweight board that's, portable. Other aspects of what needs to happen here are, frequent updates, right? With an AI system, you don't just deploy AI and say, "Phew, we're done," right? You update it all the time with new knowledge about, the model that you've created, right? As you learn more and as you learn more, you get new data, you realize the system itself is improving and you need to improve the model to make the system even better at the diagnosis. And so frequent updates are a piece of the puzzle, and that's a cloud native and agile methodology kind of approach where we need to be able to push to the device. And yet we're doing this in a hospital environment, very not only secure and private, but in the US, highly regulated, right? So you've got to fit into this puzzle that's very interesting and complicated in certain ways. And of course, I mentioned, there's security and policy and governance that all go together with these aspects that I talked about. Okay, the next slide, you can jump to the next slide, but I'll just say, yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to go into these three aspects of the digital transformation. So those are hardware infrastructure, software infrastructure, and application modernization. So let's talk a little bit about hardware infrastructure again. I'm sure you are all very familiar, being partnered or working at HPE, you understand very well that, why customers are modernizing their hardware. And it used to be that customers just wanted faster, right? They just wanted a faster box, right? And HPE offered that. But today, customers are really looking for environments that help them move more quickly to succeed in their own digital modernization. Right? So they're trying to modernize their IT infrastructure to supply services. And that might be edge tailored. That might be, specific to the edge environment, or it might be just in the IT infrastructure in the data center, or it might be in the cloud, right? So one of the things we like to talk about at SUSE is kind of think like a cloud provider, right? You need hardware infrastructure that's very easy to deploy, easy to manage, easy to build and tear down, to stand up and tear down. And again, HPE does this very well, both with the hardware that they offer, as well as the HPE GreenLake consumption model, as well as relying on HPE to take some of the burden off of the customer. And HPE also does very well with lights out management, right? Automation and self-managed environments are key to moving more quickly as you try to build up modernized IT infrastructure. Of course, security. Security is key. We always talk about it. Customers know it very well. It's still sort of a challenge, of course. We wish that security was a solved problem, but it's not. It's something like a race, where the finish line seems to continue to move. But HPE does a lot of work to bring security to systems, right? Silicon Root of Trust is part of that. And there are technologies that move up the software stack. And we'll touch on those as well. So security is something that, is across the IT infrastructure, but also across the technology stack. And HPE and SUSE work very closely in this area to provide this infrastructure, not just at the hardware. And then management. I mentioned GreenLake, and managed services are really a part of what customers are beginning to look at as they look at their IT modernization. Maybe they shouldn't do it all, right? Maybe in the hospital example we talked about, they should let HPE tackle some of the challenges for them. Okay, I need to move quickly because we have a lot to cover in a short period of time. So I'm going to touch on GreenLake a little more deeply. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but GreenLake is really, I like to say, two things. This breaks it into even more detail than that, but it starts with consumption economics, right? It's a consumption model. You can, as you well know, buy HPE hardware and software as a consumption model. So you can buy your technology in a operating expense model as opposed to a capital expense. You don't just have to buy all the hardware and software up front and pay for that. You can lease it basically from HPE, but it's also it can be managed by HPE, right? So it's very much a cloud-like experience that HPE is trying to put together for a customer, where HPE is taking a lot of the responsibility of the management and management of the infrastructure and the software and on top of that infrastructure from the customer. And that's really helpful. Customers need that. Next slide. Thank you. And then on the left, you see those 4 areas, but the other aspect of GreenLake that I like to talk about is GreenLake Cloud Services. And the cloud services are really the software infrastructure that sits on top of this hardware that can be consumed either in a consumption model. And you can see there's a number of cloud services, and we just listed some of the top and the key areas that are typical for digital transformation. Just on last Tuesday, HPE announced 12 more new services being deployed from GreenLake. So, GreenLake is really trying to span the typical IT workloads as cloud services that customers can just rely on HPE to manage for them at the software infrastructure level. And SAP is really one of those and has been for a long time. In fact, you're probably all very familiar that SAP HEC, HANA Enterprise Cloud, is basically an HPE GreenLake offering that a customer can consume from HPE, and it's all the same technology that Brian talked about. It's SAP technology with SUSE Linux underneath, deployed by HPE and managed by HPE. So that's a great GreenLake example of a case study almost of, the customer doesn't need to know all those details and all that cool stuff that Brian talked about. They just want HPE to take the SAP management off their plate. And that's really where GreenLake succeeds in the cloud services area. Okay, let's leap forward. Thank you. So we're going to talk about software infrastructure modernization. And again, really what we're after is, speed is the new IT currency. We need to be able to create environments that are easier to deploy, easier to manage, easier to build up and tear down. And so we need a much more simplified infrastructure stack. That means multiple operating systems, that's more difficult, multiple different toolkits and ways to automate, that's more difficult, right? So any way that companies can simplify, can choose one technology that helps them manage everything they have, that's going to really help. Kubernetes is a great example of that. Kubernetes, Brian Gartner likes to say this phrase, Kubernetes is the new floor. If you think about applications, the operating system was the floor, right? It's the place that the application runs. And but today, Kubernetes is really that floor. You can deploy your application as a container, and all the elements of that container, the networking, the security, can be defined in the Kubernetes environment. It's not that the operating system has gone away. You still need to manage the operating system, and you're still concerned about all the same things, security and management of that operating system. But your application has moved up the stack. And so, so that really helps in the sense of simplification of the workload. And then access to other services. You need to be able to deploy services that integrate with all the modern workload technologies, from devices at the edge to machine learning to big data analysis and many, many others that are common in the IT infrastructure environment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to leap a little forward. So this is just more detail about the automation that we need at the edge in particular, around what companies are doing with their digital transformation. But I'm going to keep moving because I'm running out of time. So, and then Brian talked about this architecture, if you will, for the way SUSE deploys infrastructure, and you can see the operating system first, the hardware infrastructure, and whether it's HPE hardware that's deployed on premises or through GreenLake, or the cloud provided infrastructure that gets up to the Linux layer. And Brian talked about the Linux deployment capabilities, and we've got multiple different, modularized SUSE Linux and SUSE Manager to manage all that, whether it's SUSE technologies or other enterprise Linux. And then finally, the Rancher Kubernetes layer that I talked about, where we deploy our applications. And Rancher can also manage HPE Ezmeral. Rancher manages any CNCF, which is Cloud Native Compute Foundation certified Kubernetes environment, and HPE Ezmeral is one of those. So we work closely with HPE to allow Rancher to be able to manage an Ezmeral deployed environment, and that makes it much, again, simpler for the customer to manage and deploy their application, whether it's through GreenLake or something that the customer deploys on their own, whether it's on premises or in a cloud environment. Okay, another last slide, please, or one farther. So we talked about SUSE Manager as managing a lot of this. I'm going to leap forward from that. So keep going, Aaron. And I'm just going to talk about application modernization for a moment as part of the digital transformation. So I really put edge and cloud native and digital transformation into the same bucket. And of course, they're different terms and we break them apart. But cloud native is really the way that digital transformation achieves these needs to move at market speeds, really. And so how is that? Well, we shift some of the approaches that we take in the way we develop and deploy our applications. And it really breaks down into the infrastructure, of course, right? We need modernized infrastructure that we talked about that's easier to manage and deploy and stand up, build up, scale up, and then tear down when we need to. And we need to do that through a number of pieces, including automation. We need to be able to automate to make that scale up and scale down happen very quickly. But then we need to design our applications in new ways. So many customers look at cloud native and they think, oh, I just take my application and I drop it in Kubernetes. Well, you can do that. And we don't discourage a customer from starting there, but you really need to modernize your application to take advantage of this flexible software infrastructure so that you can modernize the way that the application is built and deployed. And that gets you to these new market speeds. You need to be able to make a change based on either a problem or an enhancement and get that into a customer's hands quickly, have customers test that quickly, and then redeploy if there's a need to redeploy. And we're really talking about deployment throughout the day. Again, in the old life cycle, deployments happened over months, right? But now we're talking about deployments every day, and you need software, infrastructure that's flexible and automated to do that. And then part of that is part of the development style as well. So companies need to begin to embrace agile methodologies and this automation, not just of the infrastructure to stand up the infrastructure in a certain way, but automation of the way that the deployment of the application happens, right? I push code into my, Git environment and tests happen automatically. And if the tests succeed, I get deployment that happens automatically. And if those deployments succeed, then tests at the production level happen with customers automatically, right? Customers are made aware you're running this new feature that you asked for. All of that happens in moments, right? So that deployments can happen throughout the day. So that's a very different design principle for the way software is developed and deployed. And that is part of what we talk to customers about. We try to listen to the customer and understand where they are in their development model and help them look to modernize, to move towards this development style. And with that, I'm going to stop. We have lots more that we can talk about in the whole digital transformation and cloud native development world, but I'm going to stop there because I've used even more than my 20 minutes. And say thank you for being interested in the topic. I love the topic. I think it's really fascinating. And I think customers are really just at the beginning of their process here of learning about how to make this real. And I'll just close by saying, the reason when we summarize why do customers need to do this, it's because if they don't do it, their competitors are going to, and their competitors are going to get so far ahead of them. And there are many examples of this, again, from Harvard Business Review case studies. You can see how the companies who embrace this modern world of moving this quickly succeed and they win. And so customers realize that and say, oh, I need to get faster at getting closer to my customer. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Aaron, and thank you very much.
All right.
And
Thank you,
Aaron?
Brian. Yeah.
I was going to do an interjection because of the really cool stuff that Brian presented. And to kind of fall back to that silo for the SAP, if you want to pull up slide 170, I'll show how digital transformation even applies in that.
Cool.
Yeah, you know, Brian talked about, you know, design, infrastructure, development style and whatnot. But if you look in the SAP and you think, okay, yeah, that's a legacy thing and we've done everything, and even though it's moved forward and become a very Linux related thing and whatnot. So that SAP HANA instance that you have running there is very important to you. But as you do digital transformation and use things like SAP Data Intelligence, which was called Data Hub before, all of a sudden you go down that digital transformation towards cloud native. You do things in containers. You run it on things like Rancher. You have a multi-cluster management across all of those organizations or entities or data centers or wherever it's at that you have running. And what you're doing is you're managing like the supply chain or the inventory across all of your company. So it's doing just what Brian said, and it's showing you that even for things that have been around for a long time, the digital transformation is happening. The tool sets, the modules that you need are there. You know, if you need to build a container, yeah, here's how you do it. And here's how you deploy it. Here's how you do the CI/CD to make sure it's working before you deploy it on your production run. It goes into a test environment first. All of that exists. And then with something like data intelligence, the customer really just looks at the web interface and puts together this container, and this container to give you the report on the inventory at store and Nuremberg. Okay, they can see that, and then they can do the same thing if it's in India or wherever, and they can get that information, and then they get that data coming back every day from even like a retail space saying, oh, look, we're almost out of this content there. Let's make sure that we order some more so that the customers aren't bit by us being out of content. Okay, and you can do all of that. So I just wanted to bring that up and show you, kind of close the loop of what Brian described, what I had brought up to show you it is there. Now back to you, Aaron.
Well, and thank you, Brian. I just wanted to say this is a great visual, because sometimes we get deep, and I was getting kind of deep into the pieces of digital transformation in terms of infrastructure and automation, and and it's hard to visualize, right? But this really brings it back to how SAP looks at digital transformation, and it fits with what we've been talking about. So thank you. This is great visual of how digital transformation really applies to across the software. Again, the infrastructure you see in green, but then the SAP use at the top, across the company. So I appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. And Brian, as always, for your deep knowledge on all things SUSE and HPE. We have now, time check, approximately 15 minutes left that we had outlined in our planning of this presentation to be a Q&A. So we're going to turn it over to you, the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter it into the Q&A feature of Zoom. So if you just click on Q&A and type in your question, and as those are coming in, maybe one thing that we didn't quite touch on was the edge. We could maybe review quickly some of those topics there. So Brian Gardner, would you like to talk about that a little bit as questions are coming in?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get to that point quick. Yeah, and then so we'll go over this edge. If questions come in, we can address those too. And with the time remaining, maybe just leave me like 3 minutes to wrap it up. We have one more poll question that we'll do at the end too. So Brian, how about some knowledge on the edge?
Sure. And Brian had brought up in the digital transformation that's just one of the concepts. And even as I'm writing a white paper on edge and the analytics edge ecosystem and whatnot, step one is doing digital transformation to get you towards business analytics to make your business and your customers' life better, right? And it's all about automating the things that you need to do. And it's not to take people's jobs away, it's to make people's jobs better too, because then they get that information and they go, oh yeah, just like I mentioned with the inventory, I got to make sure that that order is in place. Oh, and you can even automate the order for it, you know, things like that. You can hop on to the next slide, Aaron, please. And one more. So it really is, you know, again, and when I'm writing that white paper, it's about that business analytics or things like that that you need to do your business better. And customers used to come to you directly, but now, you know, they just walk in or they send somebody in with a phone and they just want to do something with an app, right? And these services bring you new revenues and you do things more productively and it helps you accelerate things better. But one of the outcomes of this is that if I have a sensor that's spewing data to me from the edge perspective, that's awesome to get that information, but I've got to deal with how do I manage that data? And I'll just pull back and say that I don't want all the data sent into one big data lake all the time. I want to do a data pipeline with processing at each tier to get the right answers at that level, and then only provide exceptions or whatever so that I can hand that to the ML ops folks and say, oh yeah, we're starting to see this kind of exception in the data. Deal with that, create the new model, and we can get a better answer. But sometimes edge is just about internal stuff. Sometimes it's more for a customer. So next slide. Again, here's some example success stories in the edge. And just to give you an idea, in all of the verticals, and I have like, I don't know, 8 or 12 on my whiteboard behind me that we're working in. Here's 4 of them that are examples. And again, I'm going to point to Aaron and say, if you wanted to find another vertical with another success story, reach out to him. Next. And you can go ahead and skip past the title slides and just go on. But let me give you that. And I kind of highlighted the retail thing as I've talked about before. But when you start doing this, and it could be, and we are doing this with retail customers through system integrators, through things like HPE as well with GreenLake, you've got to take into account all of the things. And it could be that I want a camera there to see people coming in and out from a security aspect. Okay. And being able to store that data and do the right thing and do image inferencing and all that. But I also might want to see that, yes, that person has come in and they've ordered this before. So when they walk in, give them a coupon to order that again, or a value add thing or things like that. So you can do all of this stuff, and it could be with their cell phone because they connect to your Wi-Fi or whatever. But this is a truly distributed computing architecture for an edge ecosystem. Again, you have to understand the data science aspect, the data ops aspect, the ML ops aspect from machine learning. You have to get all of these things. And it is a bigger thing to accomplish. But honestly, the technology now enables you to do all of this stuff. And each of those people can do what they need to do to make the big picture better. Next. And why don't we skip a couple slides ahead? Yeah, and just like, again, that distributed thing, you know, there's, when you talk about all this stuff, you know, if you look back in history, there was the point of service kind of thing in the retail space. That was actually edge computing, even though it was not called that back then, but that's what it is. And now it's even becoming even more cloud native, like Brian talked about through digital transformation. They're realizing what I need to do is more containerized thing, but I still have a VM that I need to run on the core way back or on the edge because it's running a certain OS or in a certain application that's real old until that ISV steps up and does the cloud native transformation as well. Aaron, did you see any other questions come in?
We do have a question that came in. It's related to SAP. Here's the question. Internally, I often hear the question, what is the benefit of selecting the more expensive SLES for SAP instead of selecting the standard SLES OS for SAP platforms? Both are certified by SAP, but what is the best argument for the customer?
Sure, that's a great question. And let me just kind of generalize that answer with SLES for SAP is a bundle that includes SLES. It includes the high availability stuff. It includes all that automation, the wizard stuff that you need to make your deployment easier. Now, looking at somebody like me, a technical guy, yeah, I could put all those pieces together myself too. But if you do this SLES for SAP, you have all that stuff there. And you have all of those things you need in one bucket, one bundle. So that's why it's better from that perspective. And from a support perspective, you get a longer life cycle too, which if you're doing SAP, right, clearly our service packs that we release for SUSE Linux Enterprise are yearly kinds of things. And then there's a 6-month overlap with the next one. So as of in the end of 18-month, the general support ends. If you do SLES for SAP, you get another 18 months beyond that with that same thing. So you don't have to rev as quickly. You don't have to update as quickly. You don't have to migrate as quickly. And that's fully supported for that 3-year cycle instead of just the year and a half cycle. Those things are the big things. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you very much. Any other questions? Let's see here. With the time remaining, let's jump real quick. Brian, did you want to talk about Sleep Micro real quick? I don't think we really touched upon that much in your portion, or K3S. Did you want to address that real quick?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, if you want to jump to that slide. And also, I'll have you jump to slide 106 too to show how we interoperate with HPE, GreenLake, and Esmel too. But like Brian mentioned in the digital transformation, you can have Rancher as that management technology for multiple clusters, including Esmel, right? And Fleet is the way that you can deploy the applications wherever. But Rancher K3S is a very lightweight Kubernetes that can run on an edge device. I have it running on N Raspberry Pis in my home lab, okay? So I can deploy containers to go through the IO things to get that information of the temperature, the humidity, the whatever. Even, I have it doing a video camera at my front door and doing motion detection and then capturing that. So that's all running on top of K3S. But also what's running on those Raspberry Pis is what's called Sleep Micro. It's a very lightweight, secure, and immutable OS. When I say immutable, it's read only for the operating system, okay? So it's hard to muck with. I mean, even as root, if you try and write in /usr, it'll go, this is read only, okay? And it's running a kernel, it's secured and whatnot. And when you do a patch or something like that, what happens is it creates a new snapshot with the update, and then you can reboot to it. And you can put in test cases so that when the reboot happens, it can check and make sure that everything is working the way it was before. But if something broke with that update, and it could be something that you put in place or whatever, it can roll back to the last known good working state. That's very important in the edge space. And then further with Esmel and whatnot, in like that healthcare analogy that Brian brought up, that's what it is the core cloud Kubernetes is actually running Esmel for the HPE GreenLake thing that we're working with that medical customer, the healthcare customer. But what's running on that little device that's rolling around on that cart, that's sort of the X-ray device, is running K3S. And it does the image inferencing to make sure that the technician, the X-ray technician, did the right kind of scan and got the right kind of information before the radiologist does image inferencing and goes, yes, I see pneumonia there, I see COVID there, or I see a cancer tumor or whatever. Okay, and that's done in the closet cluster that's in the hospital that also is running a K3S. All of these Kubernetes clusters are linked together, and all of them are done because of the Rancher management, the Fleet, the K3S on the edge thing, the micro that's running underneath. All of these things are done that way so that a nurse or a radiologist or whatever gets the right decision and gets the help that they need to make your life and your health better.
And Brian, can you do a quick sentence or two description of what Rancher K3S is so that people get a better depth understanding of it?
Sure. Again, it's a very lightweight version of a CNCF certified K3S. It is basically, you can deploy an entire Kubernetes cluster with K3S with one command. Okay. And then you can, with one more command, you can link it to the Rancher management thing. Or with things like SUSE Manager, I can automate Sleep Micro gets put on there, K3S gets put on there, it gets linked to my Rancher cluster that's already managing things, and I can automate the entire thing. But K3S is really just that lightweight. It's one binary that runs on top of the OS, and it runs fine on Sleep Micro, it runs fine on SLES and other distros as well. So you can do Kubernetes. And if Brian had covered like CNCF and whatnot, I can actually just spin it up as a VM on my laptop and do all the work that I need to do to create the application that's going to run on that edge device that's floating around on the X-ray system.
Yeah, thank you. We had been talking about Edge a little bit, and a couple comments came about, talk about Edge, and I wanted people to hear that depth about K3S because it's a really important distinction. It's really a unique way. If you think about Kubernetes, Kubernetes is a multi-machine cluster of machines working together to provide an application infrastructure. Well, how would you do that on a Raspberry Pi? You don't cluster Raspberry Pis. If you think about a camera or some point of sales device, it's a single computer, right? It's just a small board doing work. Or even the hospital example we were talking about, the X-ray device, single board running the X-ray machine, running the components of the X-ray. But you still want the Kubernetes environment. You want to simplify the architecture so that you've got a Kubernetes cluster logically, but you're not clustering, right? You're not building up an IT cluster the way of machines. So as Brian described, K3S is really this software infrastructure that simplifies at the edge. So it's a lot to digest if you haven't heard it before, but it's fascinating to think I can deploy a cluster like Brian said in one command at the edge on something as small as a Raspberry Pi. So with that, I think we've kind of
we are running short on time. I'm sorry, Brian, I had to get out of the slide so we can just real quick. I think as we wrap things up, let's launch the last poll question number 4. We've given you a lot of information, a lot of content, and there's little do you know, we had a ton more to talk about too. We just couldn't fit it in all in this short amount of time. So our question to you out in the audience is, what are your next steps now that we've given you all of this information? What do you plan on doing? Not planning on making any changes, looking to learn more about our solutions and products and do some research, or do you want us to contact you and help you out there? And as we're wrapping up, please feel free to reach out to us on the chat and on the Q&A, and also we'll try and address that. Just wanted to point out one thing. SUSE and HPE, we have had a very long relationship together. Our product teams and engineering teams work very closely together to create these solutions that are helping our customers address their needs. I hope through this conversation you've seen that. We were also named HPE's Technology Partner of the Year last year. We invite you to please visit our booth throughout the day. We thank you for the time. Please also go to your dashboard and take a survey to please let us know what you thought about this presentation. And with that, we say thank you and hope you have the great rest of the show and afternoon or day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.